Welcome subscribers and viewers new and old to Tales from Hangman's Record. In this series we look back at some infamous and little known murder cases that took place in Great Britain and Ireland between the years 1868 and 1964 and which feature in my 3-volume hardback book series The Hangman's Record. Copies of these are available from my website stevefielding.com. If you enjoyed this presentation, please give it a like, and if you don't already, can I ask you to subscribe. And as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case and for suggestions for further episodes. Murder does not discriminate. Rich or poor, male or female, it cares not for race, religion, creed or colour. And while the hardened detective may be more used to investigating this most serious of crimes in the poorer suburbs of a major city, those living in the more affluent parts are not above being caught up and are equally at risk from its grim shadows. Murder can also come to the most unlikely, placid and peaceable of people. Today's episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record takes us back over a century to the spring of 1922 as we examine 2 murder cases that took place within days and a few miles from each other. One of the victims was a prostitute plying her trade from a seedy basement flat in Fulham, while the other was a titled lady living in a genteel middle-class residence hotel a few miles from London's fashionable Mayfair, Hyde Park and Marble Arch. And the fate of the 2 condemned men of very different social standing awaiting execution in adjacent cells was to fill the newspaper headlines that spring. Detectives investigating the murder of 60-year-old Lady Alice Jane White needed answers to 3 questions. How did the murderer gain access to the hotel? How did he leave? And how was he so expert or lucky to have left no possible clue behind? At 5 minutes past 8 on the morning of Tuesday, the 14th of March 1922, a chambermaid knocked on the door of room 14 at the Hotel Spencer on the corner of Portman and Bryanston Street, close to London's Marble Arch. It was a kind of a quiet, comfortable residence hotel in which retired folk of good standing lived out their twilight years, being cared for and looked after by attentive staff. Making the usual morning wake-up call, maid Sarah Ann Pocock was carrying a jug of hot water for the guest to freshen up when she knocked on the door. After waiting a few minutes, she knocked again, and this time tried the door handle, which, as normal, she found unlocked. Quietly she crossed to one of the 2 French windows and pulled up the blind. Then, placing the hot water on the washstand, she called gently, "It's 8 o'clock, your ladyship." She then turned to look at the beds and was horrified at the sight. It was clear some terrible crime had been committed. There was blood on the bedclothes, walls and floor, and Lady White's face was barely recognisable, covered in blood from what had obviously been a ferocious beating. A doctor was immediately sent for and the police called. The local police surgeon was first to the hotel and found Lady White still alive and breathing. Her hair was clotted with blood and her skull so badly fractured that pieces of bone, brain matter and blood clots were protruding through the gaping wounds. The injuries are almost certainly caused by more than one blow, and there was bruises to the left hand suggesting that she was trying to fend off the attack. The surgeon was soon joined by Superintendent Arthur Neal, based at Marylebone, who took charge of the inquiry. Neal immediately contacted Scotland Yard, and Divisional Detective Inspector George Cornish was sent over to assist. So severe were her injuries, she was deemed too poorly to be moved, and was tended to by doctors in the hotel bed, with officers keeping vigil in case she regained consciousness and was able to make a statement. A search of the room found no suitable weapon, so it seemed likely the assailants had taken it with them. Cornish looked into recent events at the hotel and what may have led to the attack. They learned that on Monday evening a number of guests sat down for a game of bridge in the hotel drawing room. The game finished shortly before 11 o'clock, and as the rest of the party retired, fellow resident Adeline Granger and Lady White sat before a fire in the drawing room for about 10 minutes before they bid each other good night. Described as a charming, kindly widow, she had become the second wife of Sir Edward White, former chairman of the London County Council, in 1893, when she was an attractive woman of 30. Her husband had been knighted for his services to the council and died in June 1914, leaving Lady White with a healthy inheritance sufficient to enable her to live out the rest of her days in peace and with no financial worries. She had been at the Hotel Spencer since November 1921. Lady White died from her injuries in the early hours of the following morning, and it now became a murder hunt. Initially it was thought she had been attacked by an intruder intent on stealing her jewels, but Lady White had little of value. Her gold watch, pearl earrings and necklace, and her small handbag containing about £15 lay untouched on the dressing table. As detectives pondered the motive, they learned that residents in the hotel were two wealthy ladies who had attended the wedding of Princess Mary and Viscount Lascelles in Westminster Abbey a fortnight earlier. It was believed that thieves might have noted their expensive jewellery and trailed them to the hotel. Lady White had actually expressed some nervousness concerning this, and it was at her suggestion they had their jewellery placed in the hotel safe. The attack on Lady White was the second murder Scotland Yard had investigated that month, and both crimes sat side by side in newspaper headlines up and down the country. A little over a week earlier, at just after 9:30, on the morning of Monday the 6th of March, Emily Steele arrived for her job as a cleaner and housemaid to Gertrude Yates. Gertrude was a very attractive 25-year-old high-class escort and prostitute who worked under the name of Olive Young from her flat at 13A Finborough Road between Fulham and Chelsea. She was just about to begin cleaning the sitting room when a man entered. "Don't wait, Miss Young, we were late last night. She's in a deep sleep. I'll send the car round for her at noon." Emily then handed him his coat before he left, hailing a taxi in the street outside. After about 15 minutes she entered the bedroom, where she discovered a heavily blood-stained bed with pillows stuffed beneath the quilts in an apparent effort to give the impression of someone lying beneath. A rolling pin wrapped in a towel protruded from beneath the eiderdown. Entering the bathroom, she discovered the battered body of Olive Young. Emily immediately contacted the police, telling the officers she knew the man who had just left as Major True. Inside the sitting room, detectives discovered a visiting card bearing the name Ronald True. Investigations soon learned that 30-year-old Ronald True had been a resident at the Grand Hotel on Northumberland Avenue since the beginning of March. Whilst he had been a pilot during the war, the rank of Major was bogus. Born in Manchester in 1891 to an unmarried 16-year-old mother, Annabel Angus, his father was an officer serving in the Boer War. Annabel doted on her son, and having separated from the child's father in 1902, she married Arthur French, a wealthy aristocrat and officer in the Royal Fusiliers, who was later to inherit the title Baron de Freyne. True was now 11 years old and sent to Bedford School, but rather settling down to a privileged education, he turned to delinquency, including petty theft, lying and cheating. He left school at 17, and his mother and stepfather sent him off around the world to New Zealand, Argentina, Canada and Mexico. However, he rarely settled in a job for long and was frequently dismissed for dishonesty and incompetence. He had also become a morphine drug addict. When the war broke out, he returned to England and in 1915 managed to secure a commission with the Royal Flying Corp. Soon his eccentricity and incompetence saw him involved in a serious flying accident, and in 1917 he was invalided out of the Corps. By this time his stepfather had become Baron de Freyne, but following a family feud, mainly caused by the marriage to Annabel Angus, he was cut off financially. He had moved to America following the family trouble and joined the US Army. When war broke out in Europe, he returned to England, joined up and in May 1915 was killed in France fighting at the Battle of Auber Ridge. True returned to the USA, settling in New York, and began posing as a wounded air ace. He met and married actress Frances Roberts, but soon his drug habit caused problems, and after a spell in Africa and in a number of clinics to try to address his drug addiction, he found himself unemployed. He told his wife he had found work in Bedford, but instead had travelled into London and took a room at the Grand Hotel near Trafalgar Square. Whilst in the capital, he acquired the services of a Knightsbridge-based vehicle hiring company, and chauffeur Luigi Mazzola was appointed as his driver. Over the next few days, Mazzola would drive True across London to a number of dance halls and hotels. In the short time Mazzola was his chauffeur, True never paid the firm for his services. On 3 consecutive nights between Tuesday the 2nd and Saturday the 4th of March, Mazzola drove True to Finborough Road, although on each occasion he was unable to see Olive Yates. On Saturday night, after again failing in his attempt to see Olive, True instructed Mazzola to drive into a nearby hotel where he dined with friends. In the course of the meal, True mentioned a woman who lived in a basement flat in Fulham who had money, and that he intended to obtain this even if he had to commit murder. On Sunday evening, True, by now penniless, instructed Mazzola to drive into Olive's flat. She was at home and invited him in. As he entered the flat, True instructed Mazzola his services were no longer needed that night. After leaving the flat on the following morning, True had taken a taxi to a post office where he phoned Mazzola, telling him to pick him up at the Strand Corner House later that morning. He had then driven to a clothes shop where he purchased a new suit and a bowler hat with money stolen from his victim, telling the salesman, who had noticed a bloodstain on his trousers, he had just flown in from France that morning and had got blood on his clothes while crossing the English Channel in an aeroplane. Detectives learned that True had stolen cash and jewels from the flat with a value of over £200, almost £15,000 in 2024. True was found to have pawned 2 stolen rings at a Wardour Street pawnbroker's for £25 that morning before meeting Mazzola. Then, with True's friend Jimmy Armstrong, Mazzola drove the two men to various locations around London before ending up outside the Hammersmith Palace of Varieties at about 8:40 that night. Mazzola then returned to his garage to find Scotland Yard Divisional Detective Inspector Burton waiting to interview him. Informing the detective of True's whereabouts, Mazzola was ordered to drive them to Hammersmith. True was arrested by 4 police officers inside the theatre at 9:45 that evening. He made no effort to resist arrest, and although admitting to DDI Burton that he had been to the dead woman's flat on the previous evening, he claimed he had left when a tall man, aged around 31, had arrived and began arguing with her. 2 days later, he was formally charged with Gertrude Yates' murder. True was then held on remand at Brixton Prison pending trial. The inquest on the murder of Lady White opened at Marylebone Coroner's Court on Thursday morning, 2 days after the vicious attack. Coroner Henry Oswald oversaw proceedings, and evidence of identification was given by one of her stepsons, Dr. Arthur White. He told the inquest Lady White lived quietly and had many friends, and after being notified of the attack he went to the hotel and found his stepmother almost unrecognisable from the head wound she had sustained. He added that he was confident she had not an enemy in the world, that she was kindly and charming, universally liked, and could think of no one who would want to deliberately harm her. The post-mortem examination found the fracture was dumbbell-shaped, 3/4 inches long, as though being caused by an hammer, and Lady White must have been rendered unconscious from the first blow. With no sign of forced entry into the hotel room, and with the reception manned 24 hours a day, investigations had focused on members of the staff. The Spencer Hotel comprised of 4 intercommunicating houses between Portman Place, with one end being on the corner of that street and Bryanston Street. There was only one main door, and it had a spring lock and was kept shut both day and night, and no one could enter without a key or by ringing the bell. 2 old porters were on duty during the day and 1 at night, and their box in the hall faced the entrance. There was also a rear door at the bottom of a short flight of steps leading from the street, which workmen who had been repairing and redecorating the premises for some time had been in the habit of using. It also gave access to a roomy basement, and detectives had regarded that this was the likeliest means of entry. However, a detailed search could find no marks which might indicate entry had been obtained this way. No incriminating fingerprints were found in Lady White's room, the door of which she was not in the habit of locking at night, and dust on the ledges and parapets outside was undisturbed. Cornish and his team were still running with the jewel thief theory. There had been a recent spate of robberies in London hotels, but nothing tangible resulted from this line of inquiry. The funeral of Lady White took place on Monday afternoon, the 20th of March, at Maidstone Cemetery. As she was being laid to rest, detectives finally got the breakthrough they had been searching for. As the investigation progressed, it seemed likely that this may be an inside job. The first inkling came after interviews with the staff, when 18-year-old pantry boy Henry Julius Jacoby, who slept in the basement with two other employees, told detectives he had heard strange whisperings on the stairs close to the basement bedroom in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Jacoby, a pale, thin, cockney youth with blue eyes and light brown curly hair, was the son of a barman living off the Goswell Road, Islington. He said he had mentioned these suspicions to Alfred Platt, the head night porter, and although they had searched the corridors and basement, they found nothing. Jacoby then went back to his bedroom, only learned of the attack on Lady White when he came on duty. Although his statement seemed to support the theory that this was the work of a burglar, when they reviewed the information gathered so far, detectives agreed that Jacoby's story had sounded a little too rehearsed. It was decided to investigate into his background before eliminating him from the list of suspects. Before starting work at the hotel 3 weeks before, Jacoby had lived in a lodging house but had left suddenly following a report of some money being stolen. With evidence linking Jacoby to that theft, he was further questioned about the murder of Lady White. At 8 o'clock on the Saturday evening, Jacoby was taken into custody. He would never return to the hotel. After initially denying the crime, he then told the story admitting responsibility for the attack, but denied murder. Jacoby said that on hearing voices, both he and the night porter had searched the corridors, and failing to find any signs of intruders, he had gone to bed. He said that soon after he heard the voices again, and this time had gone into an adjacent room where workmen had left an assortment of tools, and picking up a hammer and a torch, had gone to investigate. Approaching room 14, he again heard voices, and seeing the door slightly open, he entered and was confronted with the figure he believed was an intruder. He then struck out with the hammer. When he shone his torch, he realised he had struck the old lady, and fearful for the consequences, he had gone back to his room, washed the hammer before retiring to bed. Henry Jacoby appeared at Marylebone Police Court on the 21st of March. It was just 1 week since he had attacked Lady White. He entered the dock of the crowded court looking pale, with his collar and overcoat turned up, and carrying a soft hat. Inspector Cornish referred to the statement Jacoby had made and his decision to detain the prisoner on the Saturday evening. Then he stated that on Sunday morning he saw Jacoby in his office. Jacoby said, "Some parts of statements I've already made are lies. Now I want to tell the truth. I did it. I hit the woman on the head with a workman's hammer." Jacoby was removed to Brixton, where he was greeted by Ronald True with, "Another one for our murder club. We only accept them if they kill outright." Both Jacoby and True were arraigned to stand trial before Mr Justice McHardy at the Old Bailey that spring. Jacoby's trial was the first and began on Friday, April the 28th. Mr Percival Clark, H.D. Room and Bentley Purchase prosecuted, while Lucian Fiore appeared for the defence. Opening for the Crown, Mr Clark said that Jacoby had confessed to the murder and in his possession were an electric torch and 2 blood-stained handkerchiefs. When Jacoby went into the witness box, he said that after a search with the night porter, he went back to his room, but later again heard voices. He got the hammer, went upstairs, where he thought the voices were coming from. He saw the door of Lady White's room partly open, and thought he heard murmuring inside. He then described he rushed in, and seeing a shape had hit out. He did not know it was Lady White, but thought it was some person who had no right to be there. When he turned on his electric torch, he found it was Lady White who he had struck, but he was so terrified he ran downstairs and got so frightened that he said all sorts of things. It was a poor defence, but the best he could put forward in view of his previous statements. When the jury retired to consider their verdict, they returned to the court and said they were all agreed that the prisoner went into the room without intending to murder, but for the purpose of robbery, and asked if they could bring in a verdict of manslaughter. Mr. Justice McCarty said that if a person went into a room for the purpose of stealing, then the next question was, did he strike Lady White intending either to kill or inflict grievous bodily harm? If so, and if the victim died from the blow, he would be guilty in law of murder. The jury then found Jacoby guilty of murder, but with a strong recommendation to mercy on account of his youth, and because they did not believe he entered the room with the intention of killing. Asked if he had anything to say, Jacoby replied, "Nothing at all, sir." Jacoby, even when the judge donned the black cap, maintained the composure he had shown throughout the trial. After sentence to death was passed, the judge said he would forward the recommendation of mercy to the Home Secretary. Jacoby was removed from the dock and taken to Pentonville to await execution. The trial of Ronald True for the murder of Gertrude Yates began at the Old Bailey on Monday the 1st of May. He was tried before the same Mr. Justice McCarty, but with a different counsel. Sir Richard Muir was the chief prosecutor, assisted by Eustace Fulton, while True was defended by Sir Henry Curtis Bennett and Roland Oliver. Curtis Bennett argued from the outset that his client was insane and called two eminent psychiatrists who had separately examined True while on remand. Both Sir Maurice Craig, consultant neurologist from the Ministry of Pensions, and Dr. Sidney Dyer from the Commission of Prisons testified that True suffered from a congenital mental disorder which had been aggravated by his morphine addiction. Richard Muir argued the motive behind the murder was quite simple and driven by a sane motive: robbery. True needed money, that he had known Gertrude Yates had ample cash and valuables and had thus been murdered for her possessions. Having stolen everything of portable value he could carry, True lost no time in turning the jewellery into cash. Muir also contended these facts negated the defence's contention that Yates's murder was the act of a madman, by also showing that True had made numerous efforts to avoid detection, such as attempting to deter Yates's cleaning lady from entering her bedroom and claiming to a salesman the bloodstains on his clothes had been caused in an aeroplane accident. This showed that he had thus appreciated the criminality of his actions and was therefore criminally responsible. Muir also extensively discussed the McNaughton rules of insanity, emphasising that True knew the nature of his act, and since he had used every means that suggested itself to his mind to avoid detection, he knew what he was doing was wrong. This made him legally culpable even if he was deranged. Following the closing arguments of both prosecution and defence, Mr. Justice McCarty instructed the jury that to find True insane, they would have to agree that he had no knowledge of what he was doing when he struck the victim not just once but 5 times with the rolling pin before strangling her with her own dressing gown cord, then attempting to dissuade the cleaning lady from discovering Yates's body before fleeing the premises. On Friday the 5th of May, the 5th day of the trial, the jury retired to reach their verdict. Following a brief period of deliberation, the jury found True guilty of the willful murder of Gertrude Yates, and Mr. Justice McCarty accordingly sentenced him to death. Both Henry Jacoby and Ronald True appealed against their convictions. Jacoby's was the first to be heard on Monday the 22nd of May. Mr. Fear pleaded that Jacoby was hysterical when he made the alleged confessions and the police had adopted improper means to obtain them. This boy was taken into custody, pummeled with questions from the time he was taken in until the early morning, and then makes a confession on which the prosecution relied. Like the vast majority of appeals, it was little more than a forlorn hope and was quickly dismissed. True's appeal was heard a few days later, his counsel contending that, in reference to the McNaughton rules, the trial judge had misdirected the jury as to the criminal responsibility of the insane within his final address prior to their deliberation. Like Jacoby's, it was given short shrift and quickly dismissed. Both men were now housed in adjacent condemned cells at Pentonville. Jacoby was to hang on Wednesday the 7th of June, and True will go to the gallows on the following Tuesday. On Sunday the 4th of June, Ellis received a letter informing him that there was no hope of last-minute reprieve and requesting him to report to Pentonville as planned on the following Tuesday by 4 p.m. Ellis later noted it was with a feeling of dread that he travelled to London with his assistant, fellow Lancastrian Tom Phillips. Arriving at the prison, they were taken to a window overlooking the exercise yard and was astonished to find the young boy who was to die on the following day playing a game of cricket with prison warders. He was holding the bat while one of the warders bowled to him and seemed to be engrossed in the game. Perhaps he was so simple-minded that his impending demise had been momentarily forgotten or just did not register. Ellis later recalled, "I saw the poor lad play cricket day before his death, and he was like naught but a child. It was the most harrowing sight I ever saw in my life, and I had to kill him next day." While Ellis and Phillips were preparing the scaffold, Jacoby sat down in his cell to write some letters, which were very brief, one of which concluded, HJ 382. Please excuse his curious signature, as this is what I shall be buried under. In a final letter to his solicitors, he wrote, "The only way I can show my gratitude is by keeping a stiff upper lip and growing through it bravely." Another letter to Major Wallace Blake, Governor of Pentonville, read, "Dear Sir, I am just writing these few lines to thank you and all the officers who looked after me since I have been here. If you would not be put to an inconvenience, I would like you to thank these men for me. Once again, thanking you for all your kindness. Yours obediently, Henry Jacoby." The previous week, Jacoby had been confirmed by the Bishop of Stepney, Henry Moseley, and afterwards had told warders that when the Bishop had laid his hands on his head, he got the feeling he was ready to go through with it. Jacoby had also said to one of the warders, "I've told all my friends to buy up all the ropes there are, so Ellis will have to use a rubber one tomorrow. Then I shall bounce back up and look at him." Ellis tested the drop in the presence of the Under-Sheriff, the Governor, his deputy and the prison doctor, and satisfied all was well, retired to his quarters for the night. Although newspapers recorded the time of execution as 8 a.m, official documents show that it was carried out at 10:45 that morning. There is no note explaining why they had deviated from the normal hour, but research has shown that other executions around the country in the 1920s were carried out at random times in the morning. Either way, it was noted that a crowd had gathered by the prison gates at 8 o'clock on that morning. When he arrived at the door of the condemned cell in time for the execution, Ellis found the usual group of officials gathered there, the Governor standing with a watch in his hand. "All right, Ellis," the Governor said, "let's get it over with." The hangman entered the cell. Ellis, who was noted to be red-eyed and speaking with a husky voice, kept his right hand, which held the pinion straps, behind his back and out of the prisoner's sight. Jacoby had been sitting on the edge of his bed, got to his feet and shook hands with the chaplain, who was standing nearby. The prisoner was given a glass of brandy at his own request and seemed reasonably steady. Ellis approached the prisoner and as he began to strap his wrist said, "Look straight at me when you get there, laddie, and it'll all be over quickly." Jacoby did not answer, but the hangman was sure he understood. Ellis's usual method of execution was to secure the prisoner's wrists in the condemned cell and then to walk on ahead, leaving the assistants and death watch officers to bring the convict to the drop. As he left the cell, he heard Jacoby say to the Governor, "I want to thank you, sir, and all the officers for your kindness you have shown me." Jacoby followed the chaplain out of the cell and walked firmly to the scaffold. Reaching the drop, Phillips, participating in only his second execution, swiftly dropped to his knees, secured the leg strap. Ellis pulled the white cap over his head, adjusted the noose and pushed the lever. Jacoby dropped 8 foot to his death, the fall dislocating the second and third vertebrae. He was the first 18-year-old to be hanged in England since 1899. Unlike 18-year-old Kevin Berry, Ellis had hanged in Dublin in 1920, Jacoby wasn't a tall, strapping, athletically built young man. Instead, a slight 5'7" and a little over 120 pounds, and very much a schoolboy physique. Some of those present afterwards admitted they were almost moved to tears, and in general conversation with some of the warders afterwards, Ellis stated bluntly that in his opinion it had been wrong to hang the boy. Less than 24 hours later, Ronald True was reprieved by Home Secretary Edward Short. Short had appointed 3 medical experts to assess True's sanity, and all concluded he was legally insane. It was on the basis of these reports that the Home Secretary recommended True's sentence be commuted to life imprisonment to be served in a high-security psychiatric hospital. The decision to reprieve Ronald True caused considerable political and public controversy. The timing could not have been worse. Jacoby was barely cold in his grave when the news was announced, and many believe that True was being leniently treated for the crime of murder solely on account of hailing from an influential family. Short was obliged to explain to the House of Commons that True's reprieve was not left to his personal direction, but the law gave him no option. At the trial, True was found guilty by the stringent standards of the McNaughton rules, but the Home Secretary was legally held to different standards. Having information from the trial, which could not be ignored, that True's sanity was seriously in doubt, the Criminal Lunatics Acts of 1884 compelled him to order an inquiry. As True had been declared certifiably insane, the common law of England did not permit an insane person to be executed, mandating a reprieve. Ronald True was removed from the condemned cell at Pentonville and taken to Broadmoor Hospital. He died there of a heart attack in January 1951 at the age of 60. Despite major public disquiet over the reprieve of Ronald True, all the medical evidence gathered at the time suggested he was insane, and it was always a rule that we did not hang a madman, no matter how heinous the crime nor the depth of feeling of the general public and the news media. Was justice done? Did Henry Jacoby deserve to hang for his brutal crime, or was it a case of one rule for the rich and another for the poor? Thank you for watching this episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, goodbye.